In Black Clover, the Wizard King is the highest rank within the Clover Kingdom's Magic Knights organization. It is a merit-based title, and the creator of the series, Yuki Tabata, envisioned that his belief around this extraordinary position is that it represents that the person is the strongest of their time. We can see this to be the case over and over again, especially when it comes to Julius Novachrono, the 28th Wizard King, and the current Wizard King of Black Clover. He's stated to be the strongest over and over again, and when we finally see him in action in the manga, he casually solos a terrorist organization while using only a fraction of his power, completely putting Asta in a state of disbelief, and this is despite having seen a captain in action just moments prior to this, showing that a suppressed Wizard King is even stronger than a captain. The Wizard Kings play an important role in both the kingdom they serve and the plot that they reside in, and because they are often known for their strength and unyielding power, everyone tries to compare them amongst the others in an attempt to determine who is the strongest Wizard King. Who is the strongest amongst the strongest? Today I will be ranking and explaining all known Wizard Kings. There are 28 of them in total, 29 if you want to be semantical, but unfortunately we only really know the power or even names of 7 of them, so I will be going over everything we know and discuss of how strong these 7 Wizard Kings are. This video will contain spoilers for both the new movie and even some current events of the manga, but the spoilers for the manga will be rather light until later on in the video, so I will provide some timestamps to tell you when to zone out if you are not a manga reader. If you end up enjoying the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Also, comment down below with your own ranking of the Wizard Kings. Let's see how many of you match up with my own list. Also, please follow me on Twitter or join my Discord linked in the description if you want the conversation to continue. Now in last place, and it's probably one of the more controversial things you guys might hear from me, but I have to be honest and put the GOAT, Lumiere Silvamillion, at number 7. Please at least hear me out. I'm not saying that he's a weak character, I just think he's weaker than the other Wizard Kings, and he's actually one of my favorite characters in the series. Before I discuss his power level, let me tell you about him. Lumiere is actually different from these other Wizard Kings because he was never actually Wizard King. Lumiere was a royal prince and was only granted the rank of Wizard King posthumously, in honor of him saving the kingdom from an ancient demon, and where they thought that he sacrificed his life for them, when he was really just sealed inside of that statue. While the prince was an impressive fighter, I don't think it's something he should be known for. Lumiere was simply born gifted. He has light magic and has a 4-leaf clover grimoire. Not only that, but despite being a human born prior to the royals stealing the mana of the elves, his own magic rivaled that of Licht, the chieftain of the elf tribe and leader of the apostles of Sephiroth. Lumiere likely had strong spells not because combat was in his nature, but because he loved magic and he loved cool magic. He'd only be using offensive spells with his magic if others needed protecting, like when he saved his sister or when he fought Zagrid or Demon Licht. Instead of fighting, he focused his time as the prince, extending his efforts into the realm of researching magic science, and he created many different magical tools. With Sekra Swallowtail as his assistant and her ancient sealing magic at her disposal, he created a Swallowtail, a device used not only to save the world from Demon Licht, but also used by Julius so that he could come back to life. At some point, Lumiere would make the titular sword of the movie, Elsdosia, otherwise known as the Imperial Sword. This weapon allows for the storage of magic power, magical attributes, and spells, and even souls, its power even extending the ability to steal the essence of those in the area. Now, why do I have Lumiere rated as the weakest of these 7 Wizard Kings? Well, it's simply a fact that he doesn't have the feats or scaling to compare to what happened after his reign. Lumiere, even back in his quote-unquote prime, could not defeat Demon Licht on his own. He needed to use the Swallowtail to absorb Demon Licht's negative mana, and then use what was his strongest spell to defeat a weakened Licht. At best, you can argue that Lumiere, after absorbing Licht's mana, was 2 times stronger than the demon because he already scaled a relative to it and then absorbed part of its power. And this is where I can address a few common misconceptions within the community regarding Lumiere's power level. People think that the statue Lumiere that we see in the Elf Arc is the weakest version of him, but it is not. Here's how we know this. So Zagrid thinks that if he were to manifest, Lumiere's light magic would be useless against him. But in the Elf Arc, Zagrid is manifested, and this statue Lumiere, who remember absorbed Demon Licht's magic power and thus puts him above his regular power prior to the demon fight, and Lumiere is not useless against Zagrid. His light magic actually works on him and damages him. Mind you that you don't need to be arcane to damage a devil, only to kill one by destroying its heart. So this gives us a scaling hierarchy for Lumiere, in which his regular power going into the fight against Demon Licht is the weakest. His statue form is somewhere in the middle, because though his body is weaker as a statue, his mana is way stronger because he absorbed the power of a giant demon. And then the strongest Lumiere is the version who has a regular body and the power of Demon Licht absorbed. But as I said, we can only scale Lumiere to 2 times the power of Demon Licht, which actually means he's less than twice as strong as Zagrid. Because Zagrid's own statements about Lumiere makes him scale higher than Demon Licht, and even Licht turned into a demon rather than letting Zagrid take his body, because manifested Zagrid is stronger than Demon Licht. He believed that Lumiere could defeat Demon Licht, but not Zagrid, which again means that the strongest version of Lumiere is 2 times stronger than Zagrid at best. You might think that, oh, Lumiere is twice as strong as the previous main villain. That means he's gonna be stronger than at least one of these other Wizard Kings on the list, right? Well, that's actually not really the case. Let me bring up at least 1 feat from the 3 separate Wizard Kings from the new movie that all drastically surpass both Zagrid and the first Wizard King. If you look at Edward, even in just his base form, he can smack around a Yami who has his Mana Zone activated. This same Yami is able to easily smack around a Black Form 2 Black Divider Asta in the light novel that acts as a sequel to the movie. And this is an Asta who is way more powerful from when he fought Zagrid. In the anime canon, Asta actually gets over 100 times stronger in just a few days' time due to the intensity of training and his rate of progression. So that is a base holding back Edward with several feats greater than even Lumiere at his height. Jester also has feats of being above Lumiere, as if we look at his barriers that are active even in his base form, Asta's Black Divider, which is many times bigger than the one that took down Zagrid, was useless against the barrier, and Jester even kicked it down. Asta had to combine his efforts with Yuno in order to break through. So this is a casual holding back Jester with a greater feat than Lumiere ever had. And finally, we can look at Princia Funny Bunny. She can actually easily defeat Mereoleona while holding back her power as she was in her weakest state. If we look into the anime canon, Mereoleona actually fights Yami. This is a Yami who is stated to have reached a higher plane of power, and against Mereoleona, he is pushed to his brink even more, gets stronger while using a Mana Zone. It is a close fight, but it is revealed that Mereoleona was actually never serious, and this Mereoleona in the movie would be far stronger because it's 3 more months of training, and she actually uses Mana Zone full release on Princia, which all it does is make her use her second form, which still isn't her peak power. Remember that Yami was at least relative to a holding back Zagrid, but Yami with a higher plane of power, stacked with a Mana Zone multiplier on top of it, would be far higher than Zagrid, and other feats in the anime canon support that. That again shows that Princia can dwarf both Zagrid and Lumiere, even with just a fraction of her power. And let's not forget that comparing Lumiere to the peak powers of the film would be silly, because Conrad's form is literally just him compounding all of the Wizard King's magic power and all the magic he's stolen from the past, which means that Lumiere's power is just a fraction of compound Conrad's form, meaning that he wouldn't have a single hope to win. Now, people love to try and bring up these Spade demons and say that they're just as strong or even weaker than Demon Licht, and that makes Lumiere very strong, but there's actually nothing that states these demons are weaker than Demon Licht. In fact, if we go by what actually happens, we know that when Licht activated the spell, he had no mana, so that means that he would not be activating this spell at his full power, but also we just go by feats, right? We know that Zagrid scales above Demon Licht, and then we have Zagrid scaling below Black Divider Asta, and then we have a much stronger Devil Arm Black Divider Asta, who is way stronger than the one that defeated Zagrid, and Asta stabs his sword into this ancient demon's attack, and it can't even negate it. That's how strong this demon is. Asta needed Devil Union to defeat it, right? This shows that the Spade demons are in fact way stronger than Demon Licht, and therefore using these to scale Lumiere just don't work. Also, you can argue this actually makes sense narratively. Remember, Lumiere is not a fighter. He just had really strong magic power, and that made him really strong as a fighter. But he never actually focused on fighting, he focused on magical science. And also, remember, royals of the Clover Kingdom absorbed the mana of all the elves, which makes it very likely that future Wizard Kings were also really strong because they had this stolen elven power. We also know that magic got way stronger and way more complex over the centuries as humans got better at using it. Remember, this is an entire plot point of why the elves were so strong when they resurrected, because they had their magic power, but they also had the way more complex grimoires of humans of the current age. So I think that it really can make sense both in terms of a power scaling lens, but also narratively why Lumiere is not the strongest Wizard King. Now, when getting into discussing all of the Wizard Kings from the film, I want to point out a few things. A lot of people question the timeline of the film, but it actually takes place a few days before the Spade Saga. The Spade Saga starts in chapter 229 or episode 158. It starts in the scene where Asta goes to attack that Spade base. So yeah, the movie takes place before that attack. How I know this is because in the light novel, in volume 23.5, which is a sequel to the movie, Luck tells Asta that he's gotten a lot stronger in his 3 months of training. A lot of people take this to assume that it means this takes place halfway through the 6-month time skip, or 3 months before the Spade Saga. But this actually would not make sense because the last episode of the anime canon, episode 157, it is stated that they are halfway through their training period in the Heart Kingdom, which would mean that at that point it's 3 months through. And what we see is Asta returns from training with the other Spirit Guardians, including training with the Spirit Guardian who was training with Luck, which means that it's likely that Luck's statement is applying to 3 months since episode 157, meaning that the movie takes place 6 months after they started their training, and that would mean that they go fight the Spade any day from here on out. This makes the most sense unless if you want to believe that this Asta right here gained 30 pounds of muscle overnight, found a completely new outfit, learned how to fly on a sword, and controls anti-magic extremely well. It just doesn't make sense to assume this film takes place 3 months into the time skip when the anime canon shows it already takes place 3 months into the time skip. Also, I know that people are going to mention that the idea of the Imperial Sword absorbing power to make all these Wizard Kings stronger, but it's actually implied in the film that the sword isn't making the Wizard Kings stronger, it's just giving them essentially infinite stamina that it always replenishes from the sword. So it really actually wouldn't affect the scaling very much. So let's get into the 6th place on this list, also probably very controversial, and that is the 16th Wizard King, Jester Garandros. Jester's backstory is unfortunately mostly unexplored in the film, but luckily, Night Baron has translated parts of his backstory that stem from the light novel, so I'm going to read it to you. Jester was born into a noble family and grew up without any hardships and joined the Magic Knights. There he met Tenor, who came from a remote village near the Diamond Kingdom, and Raid from the Common Realm. Despite their different social status and background, the three of them strangely got along very well, pushing each other to improve and grow stronger. Shortly after Jester is appointed a Magic Knights captain, Tenor's village is invaded by the Diamond Kingdom. However, the kingdom cannot make a move to protect a remote village. Jester and Co go off on their own to defeat the enemy nevertheless, but Tenor lost his life in the battle. Jester, who achieved great success as a captain, has finally risen to the rank of Wizard King. One day, Tenor's home village is invaded again by the enemy. Jester rushes to the rescue, but it turns out to be a trap set by Raid, a spy for the enemy, in order to assassinate Jester. After losing both Tenor and Raid, Jester, in order to prevent such further tragedies, came up with a solution: conquest of the Four Kingdoms. Despite being called the Mad King, due to his ambitions initially, he gradually earned the support of the people. However, he fell into the trap of the royal faction who disliked his growing influence, and he lost his life in the process of achieving his goal. Jester has Barrier Magic, and these are some of his spells. Barrier Magic Voodoo Shangri-La. It wards any space. It can also seal spatial magic entries or exits. Voodoo Regalia creates legendary arms and armor of your imagination using warding. Voodoo Kingdom can create huge walls like fortresses. Now, when I first watched the movie, I was on that Jester hype train. I thought that he was all the way up at the second strongest Wizard King in the movie, but the more I watched the film, the lower he fell on my ranking until he landed within the bottom tier. And don't worry, I didn't forget that your boy tanked a combo spell Dimension Slash. That was super hype. Bro just ate a spell that just a few months ago destroyed an infinite space. While I consider that impressive and his hype is partially what had me rank him so high in my first viewing of the film, but after watching the film several times and paying close attention to both his fight and the fights of his peers, I can't help but put him at the weakest among the new Wizard Kings. There are many reasons as to why I think Jester is a bit overrated, but first, I do want to give him his due respect and talk about some of his craziest feats. As I mentioned earlier, even while holding back in his base form, he can make barriers that not even one of Asta's biggest black dividers can break through. And his magic was strong enough to not break immediately when touching the black divider and then finishing it off with a kick. While this was true for most Wizard Kings in the film, Jester was constantly holding himself back through the entire movie. We know this to be true based off both feats and statements. For example, Jester got hit by Yuno, who was in his base form, but just seconds later, he would easily negate a spell from a monozone Yuno. Thereafter, he would then fight a Spirit Dive Zephyr Yuno and was still way stronger than him. But luckily for Yuno, he was able to trick Jester and allow for his barrier magic to clash with the bindings of the imprisoned captains, which would bring out Fogolion, Yami, and Nozel. Jester would proceed to fight all four of them in a 4v1, but he had the fight in control the entire time, only to finally getting pressed once Yuno was able to store up magic power within Bell, which as we know, these can provide very impressive amps for Yuno. Even in just his few minutes of him storing power in a second fight with Zenon, Yuno went from being slower and weaker than 100% Zenon to his stored up Eurus blitzing him and blowing a hole through his body. But even this stored up Yuno was barely cracking Jester's barrier, and he would then use his magic power to rip off his cloak and raise his power. It is this amped Jester that would go on to tank the combination Dimension Slash, but even after tanking it, Yuno would then knock Jester into his own barrier and finally force him to go to his true full power, as Jester would unravel his barrier protecting the fortress and add that to his power, implying that he needs his full power to defeat the force he faces. Here's the issue. The 3 captains in this fight are weak as hell. As it was stated in the film, and by Jester himself, that by this point, they'd given the large majority of their magic power to the fortress when they were imprisoned. And we know that it should be less than half of their power, because Jester did imply most of it was gone. And this is important because that means we can use this to show that Edward is actually superior to Jester. Edward, while in his base without Mana Zone and holding back, is able to fight not only Yami, but multiple captains before they had their magic power drained. And Yami is even using Mana Zone, but Edward casually dodged it, and he's actually just slapping Yami around. He's also just toying around with Rill and Dorothy, who joined the fight. So yeah, a holding back Edward, without even using his Mana Zone, can fight 3 captains and Leopold at once. While sure, I wouldn't compare Leopold to Yuno, this Yami is just objectively far stronger than the one that Jester fought, and Dorothy and Rill at full power should be better than Fagolion and Nozel, who've been drained all day. I'll talk about Princia more later, but I also want to justify her being above Jester as well, and we can just look at what her own army can do against 3 full-powered captains. Jack, Charlotte, and William were not even present until this point in the film, as they were on a mission elsewhere. So we know that they were at full power and did not have their mana drained. And we know William scales to Yami because just days later, he has the potential to defeat Zenon. Even Zenon implies that if William wasn't focused on saving his squad, that he could defeat him. And since the Dark Triad scaled to each other and Yami scales to 80% Dante, then William is around Yami's strength, and yet Princia's fodder soldiers that scale way below her are able to give William and the other full stamina captains troubles. Now I know everyone is going to keep bringing up Jester taking on the Dimension Slash, but it is far more consistent that he is the weakest of the 4 Wizard Kings, and far more likely that he had barrier magic infused into his mana skin, and with his barriers being comprised of space, was able to stall the combo slash. But this will lead me to Edward himself and explain his powers and backstory. Again, here is additional backstory from the light novel, translated by Night Baron. Edward was a man with a promising future, but he had no interest in pursuing a career, and spent most of his time in church, listening to the sermons of priests. When he learns of the harsh conditions faced by those without magic power, he decided to leave his home and become a priest, taking in orphan children and caring for them. 10 years later, in the midst of intensifying war with the Diamond Kingdom, a sudden tragedy happened. Edward's orphanage fell victim to an enemy raid, and the children lost their lives. For the first time in his life, Edward used magic with all his might to destroy the enemy, and decided to join the Magic Knights to prevent such a tragedy from happening again. Edward, who's generous and always there for the weak, is well liked by the people and eventually became the Wizard King. However, royalty and nobility strongly opposed his aim of eliminating the boundaries between the royal, common, and Forsaken realms. Through their scheming, Edward was stripped of his position as the Wizard King. Having abandoned his faith in God, Edward formed a resistance to seek revenge against the royals and nobles who plotted against him. He continues to eliminate those in power, believing that it is the only way to save their corrupted heart. However, this was not long-lived, and he was eventually captured and executed. And these are his spells and abilities translated by Piku. Ice Wedge Magic, World in Church, able to reduce or alter temperatures of any space to absolute 0. World in Martyr, creates and manipulates fallen angels made of ice. Now, one of the issues with Edward is people think he is weak because he fought the Black Bulls, and they had no Yami, no Noct, no Asta, and for most of the time, Noelle didn't even have the ability to make her own spells. And then he was defeated by a Valkyrie Noelle, who people argue to be very weak. This is leaving out a lot of context, like many statements by Edward himself where he states that he doesn't want to kill the Black Bulls because he sees them as ideal knights and offers them to escape. Even when Edward has activated his Mana Zone and is using his largest visible spells, he still says that he's not even trying. Also, while everyone points out that Jester wasn't at full strength because he had to maintain the barrier while fighting, which that does take away some of his power, that would likely be negligible, as we know the Imperial Sword is allowing him to maintain his magic power levels, whereas Edward is actually fighting in a Grand Magic region with elements that would be the exact weakness to his ice. Now, I don't think this would be nerfing him that much either, but it still is the fact that both are getting nerfed. People love to downplay Edward for losing to Noelle, but if you actually pay attention to the small details of the fight, it makes perfect sense why he lost. When Noelle finally gets her Grimoire unlocked, she activated Valkyrie armor and launches a Sea Dragon's Roar at Edward, who effortlessly negates it. Then, Ghost does a Mirror Brigade on Noelle, so that there are now 13 versions of Noelle, and all 13 of them do a Sea Dragon's War combo spell on Edward's spell. Keep in mind that combo spells are exponential boosts, they are not linear. Like when these two elves did a combo spell, prior to it their conjoined attacks were easily negged by base Yuno. But then their combo spell called for Yuno to transform into Spirit Dive and call for help from Black Asta. Keep in mind that Spirit Dive is a 4x multiplier based on a statement from the light novel, so that means the combo spell made them each over 4 times stronger despite only combining 2 spells, which means that this Noelle combo spell is way stronger than just adding 13 Noelle's Sea Dragon Roars together, but it's still not really quantifiable. But this spell doesn't even really do anything to Edward anyways, who again, this Edward still isn't even trying. And the spell that finally does Edward in is actually using his own power against him. That's right, Grey would transform Edward's ice into water magic, which would allow for Noelle to take that converted power into her own. Most people didn't even realize this, but Noelle actually creates this out-of-control spell that we see her make in chapter 5 of the manga. In the light novel, the spirit within Noelle's wand, Bruce, implies that this spell is basically her full potential unleashed, which means that Noelle literally had to steal Edward's power, combine it with her insane potential, and unleash the biggest Sea Dragon's roar on him. So yeah, I think that Edward's respect needs to be seen more, because bro is actually a menace. I don't think we'd want to see the state of the Black Bulls if they were not the ideal knights that they were. Coming in at right in the middle at number 4 is everyone's favorite dominatrix, Princia Funny Bunny, the 11th Wizard King.
I'm a strange guy.
Again, her backstory is more explained in the light novel, so let's get into it. Princia is born as the eldest child of a fallen noble family. The family hoped to lead a peaceful life and rule their land such way, but greedy nobles took possession of the family's lands. Under their relentless harassment, Princia decided to fight to protect her family and her people. After receiving her grimoire, Princia was recruited into the Blue Roses Magic Knight squad. Being undefeated, her fame grew day by day, and in order to strengthen their influence, the royal faction half-forcibly installed her as the Wizard King. As the War of the Diamond Kingdom reached its final stages, Princia's family and people from her land were taken hostage by the enemy. However, the generals, fearing that Princia would leave the front lines, decided not to tell her this. Thus, Princia lost something precious in exchange for her victory. Princia, exploding with anger towards her strategist, got stripped of her title as Wizard King and imprisoned with her magic sealed. The village where she was imprisoned got attacked one day by bandits, whom she decided to fight despite her magic being sealed away, sacrificing her life in the process. Princia specializes in physical combat using Legion magic, but she's also a martial artist by nature, preferring close combat with her fists. She is ruthless and somewhat of a sadist. Her magic spells include Legion magic, Johanna Game, where she creates magic soldiers like chess pieces and uses them at will. She also has Endless Domination, where she creates an infinite number of magic soldiers and overwhelms the enemy with their overwhelming mass. She has Brink Castling, where she can instantly switch the position of magic soldiers and herself, essentially teleporting or blinking around the battlefield. Her final spell is End Empress, where she takes the magical soldiers into her own body and becomes giant magical soldiers herself. Now we also see that the different types of soldiers that she creates are different like ranks within the chess game, so some are going to be stronger than the others. I believe what sets Princia apart from the other secondary Wizard Kings of the film is that she's the only Wizard King that Conrad gloats about, as when Conrad starts telling a bit of what is going on in the rest of the kingdom to Asta, he begins hyping her up. Even Mereoleona knows of her tales where she is famed as being strong even amongst Wizard Kings. None of these types of statements are ever mentioned for Edward or Jester, but of course, statements are not everything, but Princia has the feats to back it up. With her Legion magic, she's able to create entire armies of chess piece soldiers of varying size and degrees, and it is these seemingly weak spells that already gives Princia scaling to both Jester and Edward. As in the movie, William, Charlotte, and Jack the Ripper all struggle while fighting her armies, with William needing to create a mistletoe tree, which involves absorbing many of these soldiers to create a giant butthole in the middle of the wall of soldiers for the Black Bulls to fly through. This feat is pretty easy to brush off, but when you analyze it, it's actually pretty crazy. As we know, Princia's soldiers are far weaker than her base form, and her knight form is even stronger than her base, and then her giant form, where she fuses with her soldiers, is the strongest. Remember that Jester was fighting 3 drain captains? Well, these are 3 fresh captains that Princia's soldiers are fighting. We know that they're fresh because they were not present at the Triumph tournament, they were on their own mission. As I said before, we know that William scales to Yami because of the Zenon and Dante scaling, and this would scale Princia above Jester for similar reasons that it did for Edward. But her later feats with Mereoleona just keep pushing her even higher. After Mario defeated Princia's squadron of soldiers, proving her worthy, Princia would essentially toy with her as she teleported amongst her soldiers before stabbing Mereoleona in the back, prompting Mereoleona to do a monozone full release purgatory, melting away Princia's sword. It would cause for Princia to encase herself in her armor and promptly beat the shit out of the lioness. But it wouldn't be over, and thankfully the creators of the film allowed for a sneak peek of Mereoleona's new form, Hellfire Incarnate. Mereoleona would be stronger than this version of Princia, which finally pushed her to using her strongest form and power, where she would fuse with all of her soldiers and into a gigantic mech, which makes me wonder if the original plan for the film was for Henry to fight her with Mereoleona. The fight would go on for some time, which is even more impressive for Princia because we know that Mereoleona gets stronger with each passing moment while she is active in Hellfire Incarnate. This becomes an absolutely insane feat for Princia, as if we look into the Spade saga, Merio was strong enough in her base to fight an ancient demon, and then her Hellfire form made it even easier for her to promptly beat the shit out of it. But the negative mana of the ancient demon made it incredibly hard to kill. The ancient demon that Asta faced would be even weaker than the one that Mereoleona faced because it had way less time to absorb the mana around it. It literally just spawned in and ran to the kingdom, then Asta showed up. This ancient demon was so strong that it was able to take on Devil Arm Black Divider Asta, who just got done contracting with Liba to make it easier to draw out anti-magic power, and trained with Noct and Gimodello for 3 days. Considering that a stamina-deprived Devil Arm Asta with Black Divider scaled to 80% Dante, that means that these ancient demons scale way above the 80% Dark Triad, and therefore Yami and William as well, and that would mean that Princia scales way above Edward and Jester. This actually might mean that Princia's full power scales above Conrad's base form, which, speaking of, let's move to him. Conrad Leto, the star of the film, the hero of reform, the 27th Wizard King. What does the light novel say about his backstory? Conrad was born into a noble family, but due to his thief-like unlocking magic, he was shunned by those around him, leading to a lonely childhood. As he grew older, he discovered the true value of key magic, but as people feared its power, the gap between him and those surrounding him was never bridged. Conrad joined the Magic Knights, where he met a young Julius and a caring young woman from the Forsaken Realm, Lavilia. Conrad learned to trust these two, and as a result, began to open up to those around him. Conrad kept gaining achievements together with his companions and eventually became the Magic Knights captain of the squad, the White Serpent. Conrad's life was going smooth while married to his vice captain, Lavilia. One day, he received a mission for his squad. However, it turned out to be a trap set by the royal faction, who hated him. Devastated at the loss of Lavilia and dozens of members of his squad during the mission, Conrad became consumed with anger. Despite Julius's desperate attempt to persuade him, Conrad's darkness deepened. To eradicate discrimination and prejudice and build a country where everyone can laugh together, Conrad, now the Wizard King, aimed to achieve his ideals. But he was unable to bring about change, and his despair only deepened. The only way to change this country is to truly rebuild it. The dangerous thoughts in his mind were not subdued, and he immersed himself in researching ancient magic tools. Eventually, he stole the national treasure, the Imperial Sword, and started a rebellion. However, he got sealed away by Julius and co. in the midst of his aspirations. Conrad possesses key magic, and his spells are Janus Abigail, where he can open any space. The space can hold magic and magical tools. He has Janus Baptism, robs magic from the target. The weaker the target, the easier it is. Then he has Doom's Gate. It's a forbidden magic spell that, with the sacrifice of his remaining lifespan, consumes all the magic his key magic has stolen in the past, and fuses it into one gargantuan attack, unleashing it from the gate. Now, I made an entire video discussing how strong Conrad Leto is, so I'm going to be keeping this a bit lighter than the other Wizard Kings. Just go watch that video after this if you want to know more about Conrad. But Conrad is an absolute menace. The fact that he has like dozens of magical attributes, can steal more, and can even steal the magic of those around him with the Imperial Sword is actually crazy. Light magic, lightning magic, and in theory he should have time magic because he did fight Julius before while wielding the Imperial Sword, and thus the sword should have access to his spells, if he was absorbing their power anyways. Which, man, imagine Conrad if he was out there slinging time spells in the movie. That would have been probably too broken. But Conrad's base power level is actually impressive, as we actually see that he was the one who actually defeated all of the captains that were left behind, as we see a blast of what looks to be fire magic that takes them all out, and none of the other Wizard Kings are fire mages. So yeah, it was Conrad that just wiped out all of the captains there, which gives him comparable but better feats to Princia and Edward in their base forms as well. And you might have legit one of the best feats for the base forms of any of the Wizard Kings in the movie, and that is that even when Julius Novachrono led a squad of elite Magic Knights against him, he was stronger than them all. This is actually crazy because Julius was 33 years old at the time, which is very important because we see in the manga that when Julius ages himself back up to 24 years old, his magic is stated to be equal to the ancient demon that I mentioned earlier. Which, remember, I said that it was an impressive feat for Princia at her full power to have that feat. Conrad probably has better scaling in his base than the other Wizard Kings, considering he fought a Julius that was 9 years stronger, and the movie actually implies that Julius needed to tap into a higher power. Spoiler warning for the manga from here on out. Since we know that Julius is connected to the Time Devil Astaroth, and we see in the film that when Julius actually defeats Conrad, that Astaroth's devil eye is beneath his, which does imply that Astaroth might have helped Julius out here, or maybe Lucius did it, as he probably tapped into Astaroth's time magic powers, which is crazy if Conrad's base form needed a 33-year-old Julius to take in to Astaroth's devil power. That would make base Conrad actually way more powerful, and it could make sense because base Conrad was still holding back the entire film. Conrad has a transformation in the film where he combines every single magical attribute that is contained both within the sword and also what he's stolen, which is why I call him Compound Conrad, because his form is just a compound spell. In this form, Conrad actually combines all the power of every single Wizard King within the sword into his own as well, which makes it so that none of the other Wizard Kings in the movie have any sort of scaling to Compound Conrad, as Lumiere's, Princia's, Edward's, and Jester's magic power would all just be a fraction of Conrad's power in this form. Though Conrad, like all the other Wizard Kings, never ever really went all out, even in this compound form. Even when Asta made a deal with his devil for more power in the film, once he went serious, he actually just pinned Asta down to the ground and was nearing victory, with his defeat only actually coming due to being nerfed by Asta's sword, negating much of his stolen magic by stabbing his grimoire, and then Asta absorbed Conrad's own attack and launched it right back at him with increased force. What's even crazier is that Compound Conrad might not even be his full power, as he has a forbidden magic spell called Doom's Gate, in which he sacrifices all of his life force to summon a massive meteor. This power is likely even stronger than his compound form, because just the pressure of the form was able to send Asta flying away and knock him into his base form, with Asta needing the Imperial Sword himself to destroy the meteor. While you might think, if Conrad was already one of the strongest Wizard Kings ever, and then he combined the power of all previous Wizard Kings, how in the hell is he not number 1 on this list? Well, welcome to Black Clover power progression. At number 2 is the 28th Wizard King Julius Novochrono of Time Magic. Julius was a noble who quickly rose to the ranks of the Clover Kingdom military, becoming a captain of the Grey Deer. He would later bring in Yami and William into his squad, and Julius had a very, very dark secret. Like William, he shared his body with another soul. That soul, the eldest brother of the Zagratis siblings, Lucius Zagratis. Because Lucius has soul magic, he was able to manipulate Julius into doing his bidding and messed with him at his greatest moments. Losing to Patri, that was because Lucius needed him to lose, that the whole events of the Spade Saga and the Tree of Cliffoff would happen. Julius losing his form against that ancient demon, you can thank Lucius for that. When it comes to pure power, Julius is by far the strongest Wizard King ever at that point, as when Asta actually faces off against the evil Wizard King Lucius Zagratis, Lucius would make a big deal about being stronger than Julius, and Asta would say that he needs to surpass Julius to defeat him. Also, the editor of Black Clover would say that Julius is as strong as Lucius in his base form, which is really all of this power scaling that you need. Lucius absorbed 100% of Lucifero's power. Well, how strong was Lucifero? His 50% power is hundreds of times more powerful than the 100% Dark Triad. And again, Lucius has 100% of Lucifero's power in his base form because he ate both of Lucifero's hearts. Now we know that Julius should be stronger than Conrad, and yeah, even Compound or Doom's Gate Conrad, is because when Lucius bodied Lucifero, Lucifero said he had the greatest magic power, and Lucius agreed with him that he did have it, and then of course Lucius stole it. What that means is that Lucius, who should know about Doom's Gate and Compound Conrad because he can see across timelines, he still agreed that Lucifero is the strongest. And there's actually arguments that even weaker devils like Nihilith are also stronger than Compound Conrad or Doom's Gate Conrad, but at the very least, yeah, Julius is actually even stronger than Compound Conrad, because remember, Conrad never got any of Prime Julius's power. If he actually did absorb Julius's essence with the Imperial Sword, that was only 33-year-old Julius, not 42-year-old Julius, which is his prime. People say this is a plot hole for Julius being this strong because he could have just beaten everybody, but I mean, that's kind of the point, is that he was too strong. That's why Lucius needed to nerf him in all these events. That's why Lucius needed to manipulate everything so that Julius became a kid who had no actual power. It just actually kind of adds up perfectly. So with time magic, Julius can stop time, reverse it, and can even sense the flow of mana from the future, giving him reaction times that even surpass Yami when he pairs his ki with Mana's own. But just as is the nature of a base form, Lucius is even far stronger than Julius once he actually uses his higher levels of power. Lucius the Gratis is the clear #1 on this list. That is of course until either Asta or become the Wizard King. Lucius the Gratis was born with 2 souls in his body. His soul brother was Julius Novachrono. He was bound to a wheelchair, but that didn't change the fact that he was born with soul magic, and he had the greatest potential to become a devil host of all of the Sagradas siblings in all of the entire world of Black Clover. Lucius would do something different than his siblings. Unlike how Zenon, Dante, and Vanica all gave up something in exchange for their limited contracts with their devils, Lucius would defeat Ostroth in a devil binding ritual, which is the same kind of ritual that Asta and Noct used to acquire their devils. What this means is that Lucius not only should have higher base form powers than his siblings, but also he should have way better control of his devil power. And instead of using percentages of devil power, he wouldn't have that limit, as his contract actually pulled Ostroth from the underworld, meaning there is no dimensional gap. And that should allow him to not only use 100% devil power whenever he wants, but also he should be able to use Devil Union. Despite this level of power, it was not enough for his plans, and so he manipulated everything and everyone so that Lucifero would only manifest at 50% power, allowing him to lose. Lucius would then consume Lucifero's first heart, and he would take that newly acquired devil power to invade the underworld and defeat the King of Devils on his own turf, before eating his heart and taking the rest of his power. Later, Lucius would defeat and consume every devil in the underworld, for he needed to make his paladins. Paladins are humans with devils incarnated inside of them, and then that devil power purified with soul magic, making them angelic beings called paladins. These are the intended true forms of humanity, and Lucius wishes to make everyone as powerful as gods and make them immortal so that he can bring about an age of peace and prosperity. Lucius has his own paladin form where he activates his devil union with Ostroth and then purifies it, making him many times stronger. When it comes to magical attributes, he should have Lucifero's gravity magic because he ate Lucifero. He also has the attributes of his siblings of body, bone, and blood, and when he pairs these with his soul magic, he can make clones of himself that are likely just as strong as him, as he can even recreate the Grimoire thanks to his level of magic power. And his regeneration would be just literally god tier, because remember how good 100% Dante's was? Imagine Paladin Lucius's regeneration. And he can also even just heal with his time magic. But if we assume that he has the power of every Cliff-Off devil, that means he likely also has Lilith and Amaz fire and ice, for whatever reason if they didn't truly die, because we never saw their hearts destroyed. But he would have curse warding magic if he finished off Magicula, giving him a bevy of hacks and abilities, but he might also have space magic from Beelzebub, giving him the ability to automatically nullify the power of all of his opponents with his hyperspace. Put it simply, Lucius is so strong that even when having a spell specifically created to defeat him, a spell that controls the flow of time so that none of Lucius' time magic is effective, with Neverland also nerfing Lucius and buffing all of that to barely able to defeat one of his clones. Even if every single Wizard King on this list prior to Lucius teamed up, they would get bodied. Lucius could 1v6 them, and hell, even if you say that Lucius is not that much stronger than them, he can make over a dozen clones of himself, meaning that he could just sit back and watch as each of these Wizard Kings get 2v1'd by his clones. I want to remind everyone that, of course, all this information featured in this video is information that I've had access to as of June 23rd, 2023. If a guide comes out for the movie that completely changes everything, well, I didn't have access to it, so I'm sorry. But with that being said, who's your favorite Wizard King? Who do you think is the strongest, the weakest, the most underrated, and the most overrated? Comment down below. If you guys enjoyed, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Go watch my video talking about how strong Conrad is, because he is busted. Literally a universal character, guys. Not even joking. But hope you guys did enjoy the video. Hope you guys all have an amazing day. Peace out.